And you mentioned some of those models there. I know you've got it's your Peak Performance Pentagram.
Yeah.
Can you talk us through a little bit of the sort of 5 key areas of that, and
Yeah.
how
So
you relate that to people and how they start?
yeah. So I think what I'll say first off the bat is anybody who's wanting to improve themselves as a human being. We're all human. What can they emulate that people that are already a bit more successful doing, whether that's in work, sport, health? Well, as I mentioned earlier, routine is key. So it's doing the things regularly, the positive habits, and it's setting those slightly higher standards with those habits from where they are today and where they were yesterday, and taking account, as I was saying a moment ago. So that Peak Performance Pentagram is about 6 key areas. So recovery, mobility, nutrition, exercise intensity, strength training, and mental health, mental tools. And then when you delve into each of those different subject headings, or key elements, as I like to call them, so recovery is kind of top of the list, because if you're not recovering, and I don't just mean sitting there with your feet up, there's lots of things we can do to aid recovery. Like a high performing amateur elite sports person, someone they might be throwing money at numerous therapists to help them recover day to day between sessions. Then nutrition, they'll be optimizing their recovery through better quality nutrients, like you were saying a moment ago. They'll be thinking about, right, what can I do to relax more? Should I take a daytime nap? Sleep is a big part of recovery, probably the biggest part. So there's lots of things for that key element. Mobility is about being mobile. It's not just about running, cycling, swimming, hitting the gym, going climbing, mountain sport, whatever it might be. It's about just moving more. And one of the rules of thumb I say with a lot of endurance athletes is for every hour that they're doing some kind of metabolic conditioning, they've got to try and find 10-15 minutes where they do some mobility work, and that might be part of that session, or it might be a different time to the day, because even exercising has its negative effects on the body. If all we ever did was sit on a bike in a time trial position and rode day in, day out, well, guess what? You're probably going to get some tight hamstrings, tight hip flexors. You're probably going to need to start doing a bit of work down the posterior chain, down the back of the body. So there's a lot that comes into sort of mobility work to negate some of the negative effects, as well as to combat any potential overuse injuries that are going to creep in later down the line. Nutrition, crikey, can of worms there with so many different concepts and fads, and we've touched on it a little bit already. For me, nutrition's about eating what the body needs for recovery, for fueling the exercise session that's going to come, or during that exercise session, for growth, no matter what your age, and obviously depending on whether we're male, female, as we get older, then we might start to change things a little bit. Depending on where we are in the world, we might have slightly different foodstuffs available to us, and that is probably going to become more apparent, through the next couple of years with all this sort of climate change and looking at carbon footprint of shipping avocados from yourself down there in Mexico all the way back to the UK. At some point,
we'll keep them here. Thanks.
What's the detriment of this monocrop plantation doing that's covering however many thousands of hectares in Mexico? And you've got someone sat drinking their latte in Starbucks in London whilst they're down in a sandwich with a few slices of avocado in it, and it's like, well, so there's a lot of things that need to be addressed on nutrition. But for me, I sell a lot of, and I'm not a dietitian, I'm not a nutritionist, but I've done a lot of courses, quals in those areas. But I'm a big advocate of TRE, sort of time restrictive eating.
Fasting, etc.
Yeah, not necessarily for like long periods of time, like several days, but just, you might, I'll use myself as an example. I wake up, I train, and then I'll have brekkie. I've got a period of time before lunch and then a period of time before dinner, and that dinner's a good few hours before I go to bed. My actual eating window is probably only 10 hours, sometimes less, sometimes a little bit more, as opposed to somebody who might wake up, and then the moment they wake up, maybe 5-6 a.m, they're eating and they're grazing all day until last thing at night, and they go to bed, and all of a sudden they've got like an 18-hour eating window, which leads down the path of never going into sort of parasympathetic nervous system being switched on, so that rest and digest, so more likely to have a bit of inflammation in the guts, in the digestive tract, more which again has impact on certain hormone levels and fat storing happening as opposed to the fat burning, to keep it in simple terms. I mean, there's so much you can talk on nutrition on the Peak Performance Pentagram, especially with glycogen windows after training to refuel and optimize that recovery, etc., etc. And then the other
what's your go-to diet? How do you sort of categorize, or what's your main staples?
So yeah, I mean, I'm a big advocate of eating animal produce, so meat, dairy, yogurt. But not saying that is the only characteristic of the foods you're going to be eating. Oh, it must be animal produce. To use the sort of the analogy, carbs. You earn your carbs. Somebody who's not training, overweight, and wanting to lose weight, not through doing exercise, then clearly for them, it's going to be a dietary thing, and they're probably going to want to avoid excessive carbs, those junk carbs that you're seeing in a lot of breads, pastas, all the junk that a lot of people in the Western world eat now, because we both appreciate that once those carbohydrates are being ingested and you're getting that insulin release, that is down regulating your ability to burn fats during that time and afterwards. And if your glycogen stores are already full, and thinking sort of type 2 diabetes down the line, or the early stages of becoming diabetic, where you're just constantly on those sort of day-to-day carbohydrates regularly, you're never actually maximizing the ability of your mitochondria to function properly in burning fats just day to day. So for me, it's really about making sure I'm getting that good quality protein with a high bioavailability, which is what animal produce gives us. Plenty of vegetables for more vitamins, micronutrients, a little bit of fruit, but not over egging it. Obviously, I'm doing a lot of training, both for endurance, sport, as well as in the gym. So I will get away with more fruit and carbohydrates than your average Joe. So when I'm periodizing my carbohydrate intake, and as I'm doing with clients and athletes, it's steering them to make sure that they're having the additional carbohydrates when it's needed. And you'll know when it's needed because your body will be craving them as an athlete. People that crave carbohydrates set on their rusty dusty is because it's all they're eating, and they're getting those highs and lows, as we always relate to. Whereas as soon as they make that switch to complete proteins, animal produce that satiates the body, triggers the enzyme activity and the hormones in the body to go, oh, wow, this human's given me the right sort of food. I don't feel hungry anymore because I've got what I need as far as the nutrients go to replenish everything that's happening in the body, grow, repair, etc. And lo and behold, you're not hungry for 5, 6, 7, 8 hours. There's a reason why people look lean on the plains of Africa and Aboriginals and all these other tribes around the world that still eat as our hunter-gatherer Homo sapiens would have done millions of years ago. They've not lost that animal instinct, that human instinct, and we've all got canines, which should be the biggest indicator of all that there is a need to have some kind of meat in the diet. Might upset a few folks saying that, but that's a harsh reality backed by science.
No, I think that pushback's already starting, because we hear so much about I 100% believe there's too much focus on the negatives of meat rather than the positives.
Yeah.
And a lot of people are pushing back and saying, actually, meat is probably one of the only superfoods that we have. You can't keep calling kale a superfood. You can't live on kale.
Yeah.
You can't keep calling broccoli a superfood. You can't live on broccoli.
Yeah.
But meat is one of the only things that has a full profile of nutrients within it. And there's nothing more nutritionally dense, and you get as much bang for your buck as meat.
Yeah, so and obviously we're talking
there's far less of that.
Yeah, and we're talking sort of grass-fed meat, organic, sustainably
for sure. The quality
sourced, high quality protein from that, as opposed to your processed burger, sausage roll, whatever it might be from your local bakers or fast food outlet, etc.
Yeah.
So it's understanding that, and that I think is where a certain movement, whether you want to call it the vegan movement, has kind of. They've taken the negative aspect of the processed meat, which I fully agree with, and certainly some farming methods could be a lot better. I posted the other day just about a pig farm that's gone up in China in the last couple of years. I think there's 2 million pigs that go through it every year, and none those pigs, they don't see the light of day. They don't get to wander roam free, and they're not grass fed. God knows what goes into them, and then that meat's going into human beings. So it's about what you said. It's about the quality, the nutritional quality, and that high density of bioavailability proteins and amino acids.
Yeah, I mean, no, like that's the difficulty is again with everyone just going like you're either with us or you're against us. There's no sort of middle ground where you're going, hang on, like good meat, good farming with good practices is good for everyone.
Yeah,
absolutely. It's good for local communities, and done correctly is very, very good for everyone. Yeah,
and I suppose in some respects there has been some good that has come out of the last couple of years. So especially in some parts of the world where there are now food shortages because of supply chains, companies have gone bust, food companies have gone bust. In the UK now we're seeing a lot of rewilding. So a lot of farmers are selling their farms to government, and then, I mean, this is how crazy it is now, but obviously you're probably well aware, through different carbon schemes, big corporations can pay to plant trees and to offset their own, their carbon footprint. You think, well, okay, but ultimately the people that are losing out are those people that would have probably had some of those foodstuffs from that farm, particularly in a local area. And in Herefordshire, where I am, which is was a massive farming community, has been ever since predating the Second World War, and now much of the farmland it's all been rewilded. So we're seeing now what was sustainable farming and local farming, local produce going to local people in towns and villages. It's not now, and people are having to go to the big corporates, the big supermarkets, or they're having to go for takeaways who are also pulling produce from these big corporate farms. And these are the ones these are the mammoths. These are the giant scale farming methods, the process farms, the battery farms. These are the ones that, most of us would agree are not sustainable, are not, the animal welfare is a lot lower than, your average farm down the road, small farm. But when I was saying benefits coming out of it, people have been forced to start growing things at home. They're starting to look more locally to try and source other things. They're going to their neighbour for tomatoes or for some peppers or for some potatoes. People are buying in chickens and getting their own eggs. So there is some positives that are coming from it. It's just how far are we going to be squeezed into going back to our hunter-gatherer selves, where we would have been on a day-to-day basis all year round, wandering around trying to find seeds, fruits, vegetables, killing animals. And obviously it's different from one country to the other.
Well, we've been it's a governmental box-ticking exercise to make us look like we're more green and more sustainable than we are, because all we've done is outsource much of our industrial agriculture in terms of like monoculture wheat crops, monoculture rapeseed crops, monoculture agriculture to the big European plains. And we're seeing the issues now because so much of the food is intertwined with large-scale transport, that we're seeing the issues of oil prices rising, pushing the price of food up. Whereas, I mean, that would really be a fairly insignificant problem on a very localized food system. So hopefully that does push us back to, and it comes back to like the sort of natural, why it gives me hope is that the natural immune system of the world will naturally push us in the directions of the most efficient methods. We might get pretty far down the path before we have a little catastrophe, but that catastrophe will push us back in the right direction, where we can have localized food systems and localized communities and stuff. So people who rely on each other, and I think we saw a bit of that in the pandemic, with people rallying around each other to try and distribute food to each other and make sure people were okay. I'm not sure how much that happened in the second lockdown. I think people were pretty bored of it by then. But some of these things that crop up do give me a bit of hope.
And I think that's one thing that just has not been completely eradicated, and it's that human spirit. That we're at the end of the day, human beings, we are top of the food chain. The only reason is because we have that cognitive function that is far superior to any other animal on Earth. We are a community of people. We have grown hunting, gathering. The way that we've moved around and colonized the whole world is through communication, by living together. All races, all genders, you name it, across the whole spectrum that we've got today. We, ultimately, we wouldn't have countries like the US and the UK if it wasn't for all those people before us that have, evolved and created what the the environment that we now have. But yeah, I think you're right. I think it's certainly about balance, and I think there's more to come before we kind of find a happy medium again.
100%. And if you just keep taking us through, we got a little sidetrack there. But
yeah, sorry. So
recovery,
we
mobility,
touched on nutrition. So exercise intensity. So I mean, you touched on a little bit a moment ago with people that are overweight. I'm for metabolic conditioning, for doing sort of cardiovascular aerobic work, no matter the the individual. So whether you're a strength athlete, power athlete, whether you're an endurance athlete, clearly there's going to be a place for everybody to do some form of aerobic activity. But it's about
correction.
The intensity.
I'm not against it.
It's about the intensity. So people that are overweight, there's going to be an intensity of exercise that is going to be more beneficial for them for getting that mitochondrial density up. So not just about getting more red blood cells to carry more oxygen to be able to do that activity again better next time round. It's about that mitochondria, which is the gift of life in all of us, those tiny organelles in most cells of the body, particularly in muscle tissue and throughout our organs. They are what ultimately metabolize fatty acids to create energy. And when you get the intensity right, whether you're an endurance athlete or an overweight individual, or somebody who's a sprinter, depending on what the goal is, that there is going to be an intensity that is better suited to that person to harness the mitochondria, to get that mitochondrial biogenesis, to create more of them, to make them stronger. So the intensity is really about that. And a lot of people talk about the 80-20 rule. I call it sort of more 90-10, where the majority of work is lower intensity, so beneath the first lactate turn point, so LT1 as many people call that, or the ventilatory threshold, the first ventilatory threshold. So before lactate is starting to accumulate in the body, and then the other sort of 10 or 20%, depending on the individual, depending on the goals, the sport, that is where they're doing their interval, their higher octane, higher intensity work. Again, it's case by case. So me personally, most of my stuff is all conversational pace, all low intensity. The great thing with that is you're allowing recovery processes to still happen. You're less susceptible to developing overuse injuries. You're more energetic for the times that you need to go hard. So there's so many benefits to getting that balance right with exercise intensity. And then we've got strength training, which for me really is about helping to offset injuries, especially with endurance athletes. It's not just about creating strength and power for the activity. It's also about introducing a barrier against picking up injuries through sport, or whatever the pastime is for the individual, as well as finding that balance in the body of any muscular imbalances that are creeping in as a result of the sport, which may end up in overuse injuries, or may not. And then lastly, and no less importance, is mind health. It's a massive topic at the moment in society, has been for a few years now, mental health. And any elite athlete or high performing amateur, that's got on the podium and it's been close, they'll all tell you, it's those final yards, it's all mind over matter. Who's got that experience behind them, who's been there before many times, that can draw on those experiences, who's spent more time as day to day of finding that opportunity to be mindfulness, to relax, and keep the head straight, who's taken the time to go through mentally to prepare for the task at hand. And one of the benefits of talking a lot about mental health is that we're becoming more aware of maybe how to operate our minds better. But then there are many negatives as well, when all you ever do is harp on about mental health and the negativity surrounding that. And all we ever see is doom and gloom surrounding the topic in the media, with stats on young people, etc., which just drives more, in my opinion, mental health issues, especially if we start to dilute the whole subject. But yeah, that was the 6 Qs on Peak Performance Pentagram with a few tangents as we went, Finn.